Discover the potential of decentralized technology and Web3 for businesses on our podcast. As a professional, if you want to finally understand tokenization, Metaverse, cryptocurrency, blockchain, and Web3, this is the content for you. My name is Łukasz Szymański from Tokenomia Pro, where we help businesses transition to the Web3 world. Joining us today is Irene Hernández, founder and CEO at Gataca. Irene is an expert in blockchain-based enterprise solution, blockchain professor at 3 Points, advised multinational corporations on IT strategies and global product definition. She holds an MBA from MIT, a Master of Aeronautics from EOI, and a Master of Science in Telecommunications Engineering. Wow. Gataca. Gataca is a cybersecurity company that provides fast, compliant, and secure decentralized identity management technology, also known as a self-sovereign identity or SSI. Self-sovereign identity will be our topic today. That's why I'm so excited to talk about it with the top expert in the field, Irene. Thanks for joining us today.
On the contrary, thanks, Lucas, for having me today.
So when we talk about identity in the online world, whether it's a centralized identity or federated identity, there are many problems that both customers and companies face. From users' perspective, many users are concerned about the collection and use of their personal information by centralized identity systems, including me, particularly when the information is shared with the third-party organizations. Centralized identity systems can be vulnerable to downtime or outages, making it difficult for users to access the services they need. Also, users may have limited control over their personal information, including the data that is collected about them, who has access to this data, and how it is used. Centralized identity systems can be complicated and time-consuming to use, requiring users to remember multiple usernames and passwords and to provide extensive personal information in order to create an account. From both perspectives, users and companies, there are plenty of security risks. Companies that rely on centralized identity systems to manage user data are at risk of data breaches and identity theft, which can harm the reputation of the company and result in legal and financial consequences. Finally, from companies' perspective, companies need to comply with privacy regulations such as GDPR and CCPA, which can be challenging when using centralized identity systems that collect and manage sensitive personal information. Companies need to ensure that users are who they say they are, which can be complex and time-consuming process when using centralized identity systems, which I know a lot from my previous experience as well. Ultimately, organizations must invest millions of euros in security systems, GDPR compliance, and complex authentication processes to combat cyber attacks, identity fraud, and all of the things that we mentioned above. Irene, has any identity systems been able to resolve the trade-off between privacy, security, and user experience?
I believe so. Not yet deployed at global scale, mass adopted, but we are on the verge to accomplish that. So you talked a lot about centralized architectures and centralized authentication methods in the internet and all the problems that implies, both in terms of privacy, security, and also user experience, who wants to manage hundreds of usernames and passwords to protect their data. We observed around the 2010s the rise of federated models. What's a federated identity model? Most people know them as the signing with Google, signing with your Facebook account, signing with your ex-provider. So those technology companies, what they do is to become an identity provider for you. They become a proxy so that you don't have to manage all of those different siloed identities that only allow you to access one single service. Instead, you have one single identity, say in Google or in Facebook, and that is your entry key for accessing other services. And the user experience is amazing. That's what users are asking for. Like, I want it easy to access that service. And in that sense, user experience was so great that these federated models like skyrocketed in terms of adoption. But what's the problem here? And we're seeing it today. What's the problem of these federated models? First, there is a total dependency on that identity provider. That identity provider closes, shuts down you no longer have access to all of those different services you signed up using that account. And that's a real problem, you're having a real dependency on one single company. And on the other hand, security. Who guarantees who's behind a Facebook or a Google account? Nobody. So there's still many other regulated services where you cannot use these type of federated models. So security and privacy, not to talk about privacy, of course, these companies know all about you. So there is indeed a trade-off up until today in terms of choosing security, say a government ID system, and privacy and security that has a user experience. So how do you manage all of that? I believe that we found that kind of key architecture that will enable a more sustainable internet, one that is more secure, more user-friendly, more private, of course, by design, and that is as user-friendly as a single sign-on with any of those options. So this is called self-sovereign identity. I have to confess, Lucas, that I don't love the term. And many working in SSI don't love the term either. But I guess this is how we all know now this new identity architecture, decentralized, also known as decentralized identity, sometimes also referred to, which I believe is also incorrect, blockchain-based digital identities or user-centric digital identities. They're all referred to the same type of idea in which we literally invert the roles of authentication. So now users in self-sovereign identity models, they become their own identity provider. They are able to manage a repository of identity and personal information and to have in an essence a self-managed identity, digital identity with which they can access to any service with the same type of experience as with federated single sign-on models. Like one click, I'm in. But the difference is that you are your own identity provider. You don't rely on a third party for that. And that is truly changing the way we see authentication in the internet for the benefits we'll talk about.
That's great. We have many of topics that we can talk about around self-sovereign identity. I need to admit as well that the concept itself was more known for me under decentralized identity. But after I've learned more around this topic, I understand right now that decentralized identity, it's part of the whole self-sovereign identity ecosystem, which for me as a technical person, it's fine to grasp, but I can understand from business perspective and consumer perspective, this can be a little bit challenging to understand, okay, where should I map those and where is the value for me? So you've mentioned about the values for users. And before we will jump into the details, let's make sure our listeners will understand the enormous potential of SSI and its impact on their businesses. So Irene, what are the possible short-term and long-term benefits of SSI for businesses?
I think doing great in differentiating the benefits for users and for businesses, because sometimes they're aligned, but sometimes they're not. And what SSI brings to the table is that they offer incentives for both parts of the market, for both sides, for users and for businesses. So when we look into businesses, current models are not sustainable. We know that identity fraud is growing. It's the fastest and largest type of cybersecurity attack today. It costs billions literally to companies. Why? The reason is very simple. Like companies are concentrating more and more sensitive information from their users, their employees, their customers, and they're becoming honeypots for hackers. So they're spending millions and millions of euros or dollars in IT security systems, but also in regulation compliance, because let's face it, they need to comply with regulation, being it to avoid identity fraud or to meet minimum security standards. And that is becoming unsustainable for many businesses. When we're talking about onboarding processes, these companies are facing a situation in which they want to onboard new customers, but then they need to meet these regulations that makes the onboarding super extremely difficult. So they're facing increasingly higher abandonment rates. It's very difficult for these businesses to bring on new people. So the onboarding friction is so high. But if you're able to offer these businesses, even in regulated industries, say a bank or a healthcare provider, insurance provider, education provider, all of those industries that need to authenticate the real identity of their users and customers, can now offer a single sign-on type of onboarding. That's like music to their ears. And that means lower abandonment rates and an increased user base. So more revenues in, I guess, one sentence. But also the SSI enables them to have compliance by design. Like we've talked over the last 5-10 years about privacy by design type of solutions, trying to meet these privacy regulations by embedding privacy management into the design of your products and services. Now, if we can generalize that, if we can embed and design authentication processes that include compliance by default, by design, then all of those costs associated to compliance disappear. All of those headaches from all compliance officers in the companies just disappear. In the long term, I believe that SSI will enable businesses not to store any private or personal information at all. So they will be able in the long term to really get rid of all of those databases of sensitive data that are the main source of the hacks they receive. And finally, they will be able to reduce the identity fraud itself, because now they will have always access to the most updated information. So doing business with someone is not just doing a snapshot of who you are today, but maintaining that identity updated. And with SSI, that can be done super easily.
I love what you mentioned about multiple costs that are related to the risks of managing identity in companies. In the previous company that I was working for, I was exposed to the costs, not only from financial perspective, but also from operational costs of the things, especially around contradicting goals of different teams, which was interesting example. I was working in a marketplace business, and some teams were set up to make sure that there will be higher conversion rates between market participants. So for example, there was a buyer and seller, and company was putting an investment on the team to say, okay, increase, for example, number of messages that buyers are sending to the sellers, right? So the sellers can see the value of, hey, I'm getting a lot of requests for my item that I put on the marketplace. But on the other hand, there was a teams that were fighting with potential spams or scams and frauds and so on. So they were introducing new ways to verify the person who is sending the message, which of course impacted negatively the rate of the messages sent. And that was a really interesting situation to observe, because exactly this is huge problem for companies. Like I had even this conclusion that if companies could only invest all of these resources into focusing on bringing the value to the customers and not fighting frauds, we would live in a totally different world right now. But because of constant need of fighting frauds, we are really wasting a lot of resources that could do far much better job. I'm happy to hear that SSI is a possible way of finally dealing with this problem. So going back to our SSI case and businesses, you've mentioned a lot about costs, about risks, and let's maybe talk a little bit about use cases. So what are the real use cases for using SSI? Who is using it already? And what sectors can be in the next wave of adoption?
What I like about identity is that the use cases are limitless, if you will, because let's face it, we're authenticating ourselves even if we don't realize that constantly. Like every 5 minutes, you're accessing your email account, you're accessing your bank, you're authenticating in each one of those interactions. And as a business, you need to authenticate not only your users or customers, you may also need to authenticate your employees to access your internal systems. You may need to authenticate your providers to be able to operate on behalf of you. So authentication happens everywhere in every single industry all the time. And that's what makes self-sovereign identity so attractive, because it can be applied in a myriad of industries. Who is using that to start? Because let's face it, SSI is in its infant stages. There is a lot that we need to do from an industry perspective to make it happen. From the definition of standards to regulation associated to decentralized identity to, of course, the provisioning of tools, technical tools for businesses and users to use it. Until that market matures, there are some providers that are, or some stakeholders, let's say, that are more prone to be early adopters than others. The ones, and I have to say that here I got it wrong, the early adopters today of SSI are governments. And I thought this was going to be privately funded initiative, so to speak, and then government would have to regulate that so that becomes with all the protections necessary. But it's happening the other way around, which is an even better news because that makes adoption way faster. Like the market will mature way faster this way. So governments, why are governments interested in SSI? So for one, because government digital ID systems have not proven to be very massively adopted. Like security up until now has, of course, been a major design principle in government IDs, and that typically has made usability go low. And if usability is not good, users will. So in SSI, or let's say user-centric digital identity models, governments see an opportunity to digitize their economies. And according to McKinsey, digital identity schemes can increase the GDP of a country, of an economy, between 3 and 13%. And that's a lot, just with one single action point. Governments use SSI models to issue national IDs based on these new architectures. So they hand over the digital versions of national IDs to the citizens. So they have full control of these digital IDs and they can use them to sign up in different services. And they can, of course, as governments, issue a myriad of other type of credentials like visas, passports, birth certificates, marriage certificates, you name it. Like the possibilities as an issuer for governments are also very rich. But also they need to authenticate citizens. For citizens to pay their taxes, to access any local resource in their community, whatsoever. So they are also verifiers. They also want to authenticate citizens and offer them e-government services. So that's the use case that is being explored the first, and many governments are today investing a lot in these architectures. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Universities is the second use case most widely tested today in SSI for the issuance of student IDs, but also for the issuance of, for instance, transcript of records to enable further exchange of students, the issuance of academic diplomas for these students to be able to apply for jobs much faster without employers to have to verify that those educational credentials are real or not. Believe it or not, this is also a huge cost for employers, verifying that this information is true. So education is also a big early adopter today. And now the financial sector is started to work on the space, mostly for eKYC or shareable KYC, both in traditional banking. We know that KYC processes are for consumers, but very costly for banks. If we talk now about DeFi and decentralized financial services, where these products are totally fragmented by different service providers to access the same portfolio of services as you have typically with one single bank in the traditional world. So you have to pass 6 types of different KYC processes. This is very cumbersome, and SSI can help there with shareable KYC. And then I don't want to get long with the different use cases, but the industries that will benefit the most in the short term are the travel industry, healthcare will come next, and then smart city, the e-work, real estate, to be able to buy and sell houses way much easier and faster than we do today. There are many use cases. I invite the audience to read about a blog post that we have on the case and explaining all of the different use cases.
I will make sure to provide all of the links in the description because Gataca blog is a great source of all of the knowledge around SSI. So highly recommended. You've mentioned about KYC from the consumer perspective, but I need to admit that reusable KYC is, for now, my most favorite use case for using SSI from a business owner perspective. Because as a business owner, when you want, for example, to set up your bank account, when you want to set up your payment gateway, and basically whatever you want to set up, most likely you are ending up in a KYC process, especially if you are working in the crypto industry. So that's for sure. And I've went through multiple of them, and always I was highly frustrated about the fact that you need to do it over and over again. And of course, you as a business owner, your time is limited, and you don't want to spend this time into this paperwork that is done for the second time in a row or 10th time in a row, and it's always the same. So reusable KYC, I mean, I'm all in for that. I'm just waiting when it will happen, and I will be hardcore user of it. That's for sure. That's for sure, because it will solve really huge pain in the whole business world. I'm pretty sure about that. Okay, and you've mentioned a lot about governments, regulations, and so on. And recently, European Parliament members backed plans for an EU digital wallet. Can you explain to us what it means for SSI and what are other important developments from regulatory bodies like European Commission?
Of course. Yeah, that was huge news, I have to say. Let me step back a little bit. So Europe, by far, I would say, the most advanced region in regulating SSI type of architectures. So in Europe, there was, back in 2018, European members came together in what they call the European Blockchain Partnership to make sure that as governments, they could leverage the technologies to provide better services to both citizens and businesses. And as part of that consortium, they created EBSI, also known as EBSI, which is the European Blockchain Network, European Blockchain Services Infrastructure. One of the first, they call it at the beginning use cases, but in reality it's a horizontal or transversal service. They created SSI, so self-sovereign identity framework, to be built on top of this European blockchain network that governments were providing. And actually, we were participants, we contributed. My CTO was one of the 3 architects defining those specs for SSI on top of EBSI. So Europe was already working since 2018 in SSI type of architectures. At the same time, a little bit later, in June 2021, the European Commission announced this European Digital Wallet, which was, in an essence, a proposal to modify the eIDAS regulation. eIDAS regulation is the regulation in Europe that regulates digital identities, government-provided digital identities. And let's say that eIDAS V1 had not been the success the member states had envisioned for it. And this new proposal, today known as eIDAS V2, that the European Commission announced in 2021, and that is on its way to be approved, basically took all the concepts of SSI and they said, we're going to make it happen. And what it entails is that all of a sudden we will have in Europe very soon, a regulation, a legal framework to make SSI a reality. And that's the missing part and the most difficult one to achieve. That's why I was saying before, okay, this will speed up adoption, because if we have the legal framework that regulates SSI as a technological framework, then you can use it in real use cases. So this eIDAS V2 has gone through some review processes. Back in December, the Council of Europe, they released their positioning towards this eIDAS V2 proposal. And just a couple of days ago, the European Parliament, they backed these plans for building a European digital identity wallet, this eIDAS V2. And the most important thing to highlight about eIDAS V2 is that it will be mandatory for all European member states to provide an ID wallet to their citizens. We will see that ID wallets is a central concept within SSI. But most importantly, it will be mandatory for private companies in certain industries and also to large corporations to offer this as an authentication method. So banks, all regulated industries that are today subject to perform KYC processes, will have now to accept these digital identities for authentication. So they're creating a market for SSI type of architectures. And also for large corporations like the Amazons, the Googles of the world that are serving a large European base, they will also be forced to offer this as an authentication method. And that's to me is the difference. Because let's face it, access to e-government services is not something that citizens do it on a daily basis. But accessing bank accounts or other regulated services, okay, that's something I do more regularly. That's something more interesting to me as a citizen. So involving the private sector and to be able to use your government ID to access private services with a single sign-on type of user experience, wow, that's where things will literally change. Other regions are making also great progress. For instance, Canada. Canada is also working very strongly, specifically towards SSI architectures, and there are talks between Europe and Canada to find synergies and interoperability between both regions. In Latin America, the IDB Lab is doing a great job with our LAC network, and they're also built and defined an SSI framework on top. In Asia, Singapore, South Korea, there are many countries that are also working in this direction.
I would like to add, because that was also my first impression when we started to chat some time ago, that, okay, so right now, if there will be this government ID, let's call it like that, and I will be able to authenticate through it to different providers and so on, what about my privacy? It sounds a little bit like, oh, okay, so now I'm going to be really exposed. But to our listeners, this is really important information. It's quite the opposite, because thanks to decentralized ID infrastructure, you are in control of your privacy, meaning that even from the product perspective interface, and I'm user of Gataca already, so I confirm that even from the product interface perspective, you are able really easily by just one button to say, okay, this is the information that I want to share, or this is the information that I don't want to share, which is, for me, it's a game changer. This is not something that we've seen before. It's more like we were forced to share everything, and even more that we were even like aware of. Right now, it's just user experience, even on these early stages of implementation of the whole SSI as an infrastructure. For me, it's a game changer. It's really great. So I hope to see the adoption rate will be far much faster, not only because of reusable KYCs, but especially because of privacy.
This is such an important concept to highlight, Lucas, because in the end, SSI was born out of that concept or that pain. Like SSI was born truly to give users back control over their private information, not about user experience, which it also provides, but the real essence about SSI is to make sure that the users decide who they share their information to, and that only share the strictly necessary information for the transaction in course.
So let's dive deeper into the SSI ecosystem. Could you describe the ecosystem, like what are the agents, what are the building blocks, and explain the concept of the trust triangle?
Important thing to understand first about SSI is that there are three main stakeholders, and they relate to this trust triangle. We have on the one hand side users, you, me, anyone in the audience that want to authenticate, they want to access to services. On the other hand, we have issuers of digital credentials, also known as verifiable credentials. What's a credential? Any piece of information about you. It could be your digitized ID, but also your driver's license, your academic credentials, your employee card, your loyalty card to your airline, like really limitless. Anything that today you would put in your physical wallet, but much more because now it's digital. Now you're not constrained to a physical wallet. You can put any personal information on it, but not that you just scan documents and digitize them and store them in a central repository. The difference here is that issuers are still issuers. Like government will still be the issuer of your national ID. Your university will still be the issuer of your academic diploma. But now all of these issuing agents or trusted authorities, they issue these credentials based on a common format, a common data model, so that you can manage all of those different credentials from all of those different issuers in a single interface, in a single digital wallet. So that's a key important point. And issuers play a very important role because these credentials are now automatically verifiable. When you present as a user these credentials to And then we have the third stakeholder in the ecosystem, to a verifier, to a service provider. That service provider can verify the authenticity of this credential, of this personal information, and the fact that this personal information belongs to you automatically without actually involving the issuer and asking, hey, university, is this diploma correct? So in an ecosystem, in an SSI ecosystem, we have issuers of credentials, we have holders or users that create this self-managed identity repository of credentials. And then we have the verifiers, all of those service providers that users want to interact with to access any service in the internet. So a typical example would be government issuing me as an issuer a national ID, and me as a holder presenting this digitized version of my national ID to a bank to authenticate and access or create a new bank account, which in this case, the bank would be the verifier. So this is the three main roles in SSI ecosystems. Now, this is not only the basic concepts about the roles. There are two main concepts that the audience needs to understand about SSI. First is the concept of DID. And if you deep dive into SSI, you will encounter this term rather quickly. DIDs stem from decentralized identifiers. In real life and online, of course, users need to identify themselves, and they do so using identifiers. So your national ID number or your account number, like they're always identifiers associated to your identity. Now, in decentralized identity, the beauty is that those identifiers are decentralized, meaning they don't need a central authority to manage those identifiers. We don't need a government to issue you this identifier to you. These identifiers are self-created and you manage themselves. You don't need that centralized authority. And they're typically, and we can talk about that, but that's more technical, they're typically registered in a blockchain network, so that you can use this blockchain network as a key distributor, a decentralized PKI infrastructure. And the other term is verifiable credentials, which is this trustworthy, tamper-proof, machine verifiable identity document. So it's this data model that allows to digitize any type of identity information, regardless of if it's a driver's license or an academic diploma, all in the same verifiable credential format. And both terms, DIDs and verifiable credentials, are today standards defined by the W3C consortium. So that's the main concept. We will talk also about blockchain, the role of blockchain and ID wallets later on.
I encourage all of the listeners to go to the links provided in the description for the blog posts from Gataca, where you will see visual representation of the trust triangle. I hope this will help to understand all of the things that we are discussing right now, which it's fairly easy if you would really invest a little bit of time to understand that. So no worries, it may sound complicated at the beginning, but at the end of the day, it's just a really beautiful piece of architecture and the values behind that. For me, another game changer is the fact that verifier don't need to include issuer in authentication process. Issuer can right now drop all of this bureaucratic overhead by just from operational perspective answering all of these requests from verifiers and verifying that yes, this is legit and so on. Huge cost savings, and they can focus on something more valuable for them or for their customers. This was like another point that make me a bigger fan of SSI architecture, even bigger fan of SSI architecture from the get-go. And in terms of the use cases, you've mentioned about this government use case with all of the stakeholders. I remember our discussion before the recording when we were discussing the possible implementation of such an ecosystem around carbon credits. So sustainability, all of the green agenda that is happening right now, and for sure we will hear about it more and more. And from my perspective, as a person that is also working on shaping architecture for the clients around the Web3 stack, carbon credits was one of the first use case when I've seen that, wow, this SSI infrastructure can be really a huge game changer here. So when we're discussing that, our thinking was, okay, so there needs to be certification body in this carbon credits ecosystem, and it can be mapped as an issuer of verifiable credentials, where VC will be basically certification of carbon credit. Then sustainable investment that offsets carbon emission will be a user with decentralized identifier under which it will hold verifiable credential issued by certification body. And at the end of the day, there will be like carbon credits market that can be verifier of verifiable credentials that ultimately can verify is user selling carbon credits that are backed by official certificate. Long story short, is it legit? Do you really have this investment that offsets the carbon credits? So again, this authentication problem is solved without involving issuer. Everyone can work autonomously, which is always a good idea. And personally, I'm a big fan of such an architecture. And before I started to think about implementing the SSI infrastructure, most of the cases that I've seen was mainly trying to map this ecosystem into NFTs. So right now, as you listener can hear, we didn't mention about NFT at all in this whole ecosystem. So you don't have NFTs. And besides that, you have far much more value in the whole setup. Irene, can you tell to our listeners, like, what are the advantages of such architecture using SSI over building the same solution only on top of the NFTs?
Of course. And I really love this example. It's a beautiful example because at the beginning you would say, what does have carbon credits to do with SSI? Like, how can you apply that? But as you explain, like we still have this trust framework or triangle everywhere. We have issuers that certify or attest to some information, and then you want to say to a third party, hey, I have this information so that you can access their services. So in carbon credits, as you said, companies, what they do is to invest in green products, and then they get a certification from a certifying body to demonstrate, to basically do two things, either to offset their quotas. Some companies have quotas and they have so much carbon credits, or to put them in the market, to actually sell those credits into either primary or secondary markets. And blockchain has played, this has been a beautiful use case for blockchain technologies in this typical approach of finding problems to solve with blockchain, where NFTs could be a nice architecture. Why? There are some problems with certifications and making sure that this project has not been certified twice, that they're actually implemented everything. And then you have the buyers that if they're governments and regulated markets, that's easier. But once you get into secondary markets and individuals actually buying and supporting these green projects, then verification becomes a little bit more difficult because these buyers may not be so savvy as to differentiate or really know whether those certificates are real or not. Another important fact about carbon credits market is that it is $100 billion industry. So it's huge. There is a lot of money moving here. So the NFTs approach has typically started with voluntary credits, almost because they're not so much regulated. They're easier to implement or to start with as a use case. And they definitely solve some, like tokenization of assets work when there is an underlying problem in a traditional market, either because there's not enough transparency, which is the case in this market, or because you need to provide global accessibility. And today, these individuals don't have access to those credits. Or, for instance, in the real estate industry, because you need to provide liquidity to the assets, which is not the case in carbon credits. NFTs solve some of the challenges in carbon credits, but the result is limited. It cannot be built on top, because when you are a project, when you are the owner of this carbon credit, of this certification, and you want to present it to a primary or secondary market, that's not the only thing that you need to prove. You need to prove other things. You need to prove that you're a real business, that this is your legal information. You need to provide other authentication sources on top of the certification per se. So if you implement that with NFTs, you end up adding a completely different set of technology architecture into a traditional Web 2 type of solution. And you're forcing these companies, but also all the buyers, to understand what NFT is, to have a crypto wallet, to know how to interact with that. And let's face it, that's not yet massively adopted. Everyone doesn't know how to use or hold an NFT. So this quite limits the implementation of this type of products. The beauty about SSI is that you can still leverage all the potential and good use cases and benefits of blockchain technologies, but making it as an underlying technological piece, not necessarily forcing it to the end user. So with SSI, you could have this certification in a mobile app that you don't really need to know that uses blockchain technologies in the background. And you have this beautiful certified, like with the logo and whatsoever, together with all your identity information. And use that one single tool that you understand and is easy to understand how to use to access and to log in into these marketplaces. Same thing from the buyer perspective, from the verifier's perspective, you can now verify that automatically without really understanding who are the certification bodies, do they really exist, is it legit? Like SSI provides all that trust for you. And this is where blockchain runs in the background. Blockchain in SSI is used to store trust frameworks. What is a trust framework? A trust framework is really a set of registries of who is an authorized issuer of this type of credential. What are the types of credentials that can be issued? What's the format? Like a carbon credit certification, what are the fields within this certification? How do they look like? And also verifiers can verify the identifiers of these companies. So this trust framework, all of those registries of who's an issuer, all of that are stored in the blockchain. But these is not forced on the end consumer. Verifiers and issuers don't have to create a crypto wallet and access that specific blockchain where the trust framework is located, because the technology manages that on their behalf. So I would say that SSI in this specific use case can help bridge the Web2 world in which the carbon credits market works today with all the benefits of blockchain technologies.
The points that you made around user experience between NFTs and SSI, and also regulatory clarity, meaning that in terms of SSI, we do have clear regulatory framework, whereas for NFTs, not really, especially critical for ecosystems where all of the stakeholders are businesses, which is the case for carbon credits, right? So if you don't have like retail consumers, you have B2B ecosystem, like businesses, in order to increase adoption, they want to see regulatory clarity. They want to know that, okay, we are operating within some legal framework that is clear, that we are not going into some more risks. And also we don't need to set up some weird like crypto wallets, sign some transactions and so on. I don't think it's even possible to onboard some big company into such stuff. So that's why SSI is far much better proposition for established businesses around ecosystem like carbon credits. So let's talk about the product, because we are talking about SSI and the stuff around it. But at the end of the day, Gataca is a product that have solutions for the stakeholders on the ecosystem that we've mentioned. So in terms of the SSI product suite, like how does it look like? What it needs to include to be, let's say, full suite product for SI?
Let me talk first from a general perspective, not about our Gataca product.
Yeah.
So an SSI product suite, and I've mentioned that along the chat, the kind of the central point is an ID wallet. The concept is very simple. Today, most of the wallets are mobile wallets, meaning mobile apps that you have in your phone, where you store all of those identity credentials. It's the same thing or same concept as the wallet you hold in your pocket, but as a mobile app in your phone. This is now your phone becomes your infrastructure to hold all of these verifiable credentials. And that's an essential piece of the SSI model. And that's what makes it related to EIW2. But what I think people forget in many cases is that SSI is not just the ID wallet. Many people feel attracted or think that SSI is just an ID wallet, just a mobile app where you store credentials. Quite the contrary. For me, the wallet is just the tip of the iceberg. Like the technological set that has to be underneath is huge. It's quite complicated, to be honest, because you need to enforce privacy, you need to enforce accessibility to different trust frameworks, interoperability from different, on the one hand side, technologies like blockchain technologies, but also to different vendor implementations. Because let's face it, the ambition to technology providers like us is not to enforce our wallet to an end user. The ideal world is that in which a user says, okay, I want to use this wallet to store my credentials. This is the one I like because it's more beautiful, whatever, more secure, whatever. But it's a choice. It has to be a choice for the end user. So you need to enforce this interoperability also between vendor technologies. What's underlying an ID wallet? On the one hand side, you need tools for issuers. You need to give all the tools for an issuer to be able to generate those verifiable credentials according to the W3C consortium standard and in a secure, super secure way so that they can hand over these credentials to the rightful owner, to the rightful ID wallet. And that's not an easy thing to do. But also you need to provide all of these whole set of authentication tools to verifiers so that they can onboard new users with their ID wallet, like by verifying verifiable credentials. So you have now two additional products, B2B products that you need to put out there in the market. And underneath, there is the real brain, the real complexity, because then you have different trust frameworks. Europe is building its own trust framework. They're building their own databases or registries where they say, okay, official universities that will be able to issue official academic diplomas, this list. Official governments issuing national IDs, this list. And all of those registries, also of types of credentials that will be official under a European framework, they're managed in a very specific European framework, but you will have also another one in Canada, another one in America, maybe for national use cases, a national one on top. So you also need all the technology to be able to interact with all of those different frameworks, even with trusted lists or more traditional centralized trust frameworks that do not necessarily have to rely on blockchain technologies. So all of this technology that enables interoperability between different trust frameworks, between different providers, all of that is what lies behind and that nobody sees when talking about SSI. So again, ID wallets, very nice thing. Everyone wants to have their ID wallet and their credentials in their phone, but SSI is so much more.
So let's deep dive on Gataca. Can you tell us more about Gataca from the product perspective? Do you cover this whole SSI product suite that you mentioned? And as a business, where are you now and what are your plans for the future?
Sure. So from the technological perspective, we've learned a lot. We are one of the oldest guys in a rather new world. So we started building all of those tools that I just mentioned. So we have an ID wallet, of course, and we have tools for issuers and tools for verifiers. Now, over time, and all of those tools that we had were on-premise solutions because governments, universities, early adopters wanted this type of on-premise approach. And we started developing all of these lower part of the iceberg, all of these brain for the SSI technology that people usually don't see. And now we've grown a lot over the last couple of years. And what we offer today is a super easy to use tool for issuers and verifiers, which is called Gataca Studio. We have the ID wallet and we have Gataca Studio, which is today a SaaS version of our platform so that issuers and verifiers can start with SSI right away. So what's the problem with current technology tools in the market? Because it's a super complex technological stack, most of the providers that are starting more recently, they're starting with the basic pieces of the puzzle. So they offer APIs to connect to SSI. They offer core libraries, open source libraries, so that customers can start playing around SSI. But they're very low-end products, mostly aiming developers that want to start playing around SSI. But from a verifier and issuer perspective, they're more business-oriented. They need tools that enable them building SSI type of architectures without really needing to understand what the data model inside the W3C consortium is. Like today, up until the release of Gataca Studio, like a verifier and issuer needed to get very acquainted, technologically speaking, with SSI. Gataca Studio is a low-code platform. They don't really need to know all the technological difficulties underlying SSI. They can just drag and drop, very easily configure issuance processes or verification processes without all the cumbersome understanding of SSI. So that's our stellar product today, Gataca Studio, and this is a big differentiator in the market. Our goals is obviously to be more today very focused on the European market because our relationship with the European Commission and many customers, we've implemented our technology with governments, with universities in Europe, also with some banks. And now our main goal for the near future is to have an EIDAS compliant wallet. So we're following very closely all the technical specifications that are being released out of this EIDAS V2 specification. And we hope to be the first ones to put that EIDAS compliant solution in the market for our customers.
So I wish you good luck with that. I'm a big fan of Gataca already. So I have your wallet. I was also playing with the studio, and I'm trying to figure out right now what verifiable credentials I can issue just to play around with it, because I just love the concept. I love the tool. So fingers crossed for your business goals. I'm really sure that you will be able to achieve that. Irene, thanks for taking the time to be here and for sharing your expertise with us. I'm really excited because of this episode. I really love that. And I love the topic and the fact that you were able during this short amount of time to transfer all of this high quality information to us. So I hope we will have another chance in the future to meet and talk again, maybe about some more specifics or detailed topics. That would be really nice. But for now, it's time to wrap up. So Irene, thank you again. If you have any last words to our audience, please go.
Thanks, Lucas. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to spread the word a little bit more about SSI. I guess the last words are, if you want to get into this world, I totally encourage you to create a Gataca Studio account. You have a free version of it, so you can start playing and understanding the concepts without any commitment. So I totally encourage you to start building on top of it.
Exactly. Same from my side. Go to Gataca site. All of the links will be provided in the description. Go create an account. It's really seamless process. Download the wallet as well. And again, Gataca blog is, I think, the best resource of understanding the SSI as a concept, underlying building blocks. So just go, try that. And I think you will join our club of SSI fans. That's for sure. And if you are interested in staying up to date on all things Web3, be sure to subscribe to our podcast to never miss an episode. We cover a range of topics and have a diverse lineup of guests who are experts in their field. So hit that subscribe button and join us on our journey as we explore the exciting world of Web3. Thanks for tuning in.